Hey, well, thank you. Thank you to both Christopher and to Beth. You've set up for my presentation in a very sort of convenient way. I do want to sort of give you a little heads up. The title of this panel is Gender, Sex, and Emotion. And what I want to do is I want to kind of zoom out again a little bit and look primarily at the gender part of this panel, bringing in emotion tangentially. But the reason I want to do that is the following. In our day and age, there's a really deep crisis when it comes to masculinity and femininity. So in spite of a lot, so Beth, I agreed 100% with what you said. It was just a marvelous presentation, sort of almost healing to hear all of that. And yet there's a kind of something strange, something paradoxical that I think the real meaning of femininity, the real meaning of masculinity and femininity are being lost, sort of ever weakening contours. They're disappearing. And there is a kind of almost androgyny that's setting in. And there's also a rebellion against masculine and femininity. And all of this has reached a climax in the whole transgender movement and in the of course, the rejection of traditional marriage and the denial that there has to be a complementarity in the genders. So on the one hand, we have the danger of stereotyping and so forth. On the other hand, we have this problem of the loss of gender. And one of the things I'll introduce my topic by telling you about two households that we have at Ave Maria. One is called Esto Femina and the other is Esto Vir. So Esto Femina means be a woman. So it's in the imperative, and be a man, Esto Vir. And there's something I think touching about it, the fact that these young men and women have a concern about the loss of this God-given dimension of human existence, a very beautiful dimension of human existence. On the other hand, there's something that I think is a little bit off about it. And what I would like to do is look at sort of the structure of gender within the human person on 3 different levels and ask the question about the significance of gender within the human person. And in particular, sort of the overarching question that I'm going to have is the following. Should gender be a direct object for us, our own gender, our own masculinity and our own femininity? Should it be an issue of concern for us directly in our actions, in our choices, and in our motivations? And Hildebrand is going to be kind of providing the framework in the following way. I think a central theme in the work of Hildebrand is this idea that I would just really summarize it in terms of the gospel, saying that unless the seed falls to the ground and dies, it doesn't bear fruit. So for Hildebrand, this idea of transcendence is so central that even though the goal of life in some sense, even though the end of life in some sense is happiness, for him, the goal is not happiness. Happiness is a gift that comes to us, that we receive when we live for others. And so I think there's something like that going on with gender, that our own masculinity and femininity shouldn't be something that's a goal for us. And yet, even though we can be concerned about the loss of it in culture, we can say, well, how do we retrieve it? How should it come back without turning back on our own selves? Okay, so I want to then just quickly give a little bit of background. I'm going to be drawing from various authors, Edith Stein, John Paul II, Carl Stern, Gertrude from the Fort, but I won't be directly citing them just because in the interest of time. Okay, so I want to first go over the 3 dimensions of gender that I think we can find in the human person. All right, the first is the one that that both Beth and Christopher have alluded to, which is what you could say what exists on the level of nature. And whether it comes from our bodies or from our souls, in any case, if you consider the close relationship there is between body and soul, we can say that there is such a thing as a feminine nature and a masculine nature. Okay, this exists in a very deep level of our being. Now, there are several things to note here. Now, first of all, because of the union of the body and soul, we recognize the gender of a person through their body, of course. But there are three things to note here. The first is that this dimension of our being is independent of our choice. It's independent of our experience. It's independent of any tendencies that are masculine or feminine, and it's independent of any other expressions or manifestations, which I'm going to touch on later, okay? Regardless of how we feel or what we choose, this exists in us by the God-given structure of our being. Secondly, when it comes to masculinity and femininity, all men and women possess masculinity and femininity equally. There's no such thing as being more or less masculine on this level. And thirdly, this sexuality on this, or gender on this dimension, is trumps individuality. In other words, no matter what our individuality is, it will never overcome or negate our gender. Okay, our gender is, to use a mathematical language, coextensive with our personal identity. Okay, so I should have started, our individuality. It's coextensive with our individuality. Even though I'm an individual, I'm always going to be a feminine individual by nature. Masculine, a man is a masculine individual by nature. Okay, so now I want to turn, we're still in number 1 here. What is the meaning or the significance of this dimension of masculinity and femininity? And I want to begin with a couple of negatives, several negatives. So A, it does not necessarily give rise to any tendencies or manifestations that are specific. Okay, and I'm going to touch on those in a minute. B, it doesn't determine us to any specific actions. Beth very beautifully spoke about that. We are not determined by our masculine or feminine nature to anything specific in terms of actions like the animal is. Third, C, we can ask, does it give rise to any rules? That's an important question. And I especially find that in Catholic circles, there are these rules for men and women. All right, and here I have a twofold, we have to divide this into 2. Are there any positive commands following from the fact that I am a man or a woman? And the answer is no. There's nothing that I have to do, any way that I have to be because I'm a man or a woman. Is there any prohibition? And the answer to that is yes, only one. There's only one prohibition connected to me in my gender on this level. But before I say what that is, what we have to do is we have to look at the positive now, the positive significance of gender here. Okay, and what is the meaning of this invention, as Alice von Hildebrand calls it? It's the possibility of a spousal love relationship between a man and a woman that is given to us as a gift through gender and gendered sexuality. Okay, that makes possible, on the basis of physical sexuality, the profoundest and deepest love union between a man and a woman, which culminates in the fruitfulness of new human life. Okay, so that is the deepest significance of gender on this level. All right, so now we're going on. What is the prohibition then? The one solitary prohibition that rises from gender on this level. It's that a spousal union may not be attempted between a man and a man. It can't be accomplished anyway, but it may not be attempted. It can't be attempted between a woman and a woman. All right, and finally here, I want to say, does gender on this level give rise to any roles? Okay, so this is a new question. And the answer is to only one, to motherhood and fatherhood. And here I do think that some attention should be paid to the role of being a mother, the role of being a father. Why? Because of the need that the child has for both for the individual gifts that the mother can give and the individual gifts that the father can give. They cannot trade places when it comes to these roles. However that's worked out in the life of the individual couple or individual family, I think some attention needs to be paid to this. I'm going to quickly say something. There's one more negative rule that applies in the supernatural life, which is that women may not become priests. Okay, but I threw a bomb there, and I'll leave that alone now. Okay, so now I want to look at the second dimension of gender, or we can call it the second level of gender. And this is found in what Edith Stein calls the configuration of the body-soul relation and the tendencies of various kinds. By the way, I'm going pretty quickly here. If anybody would like to have an outline of this, you can email me. I'm at Ave Maria. I'm not assuming it's going to be that interesting to anyone, but if you'd like it, I can send it to you. Okay, so what we have here, we're talking about now on a kind of more superficial level, that there are various tendencies that arise there in the way of experiencing the world, in the way of perceiving the world, in the way of responding to the world. Okay. And also including the affective sphere in the way of responding effectively to the world. Okay, and now we have to affirm, yes, we can find typicalities. We say there are typically feminine ways of all of this. There are typical feminine or masculine tendencies when it comes to all of this. And this we just take as a fact, okay? And we're not surprised by that, especially if we think of the roles of motherhood and fatherhood, okay? It makes sense that there should be these tendencies. But now again, we have to ask some extremely important questions. A, are these necessarily present in every given case? And again, Edith Stein tells us no. That's why they're called typicalities and not necessities, okay? B, we can ask, is it morally required for them to be present? Is there something morally wrong with a woman or a man if they don't have them? And since we said no to the first, we have to say no here. Absolutely not. And thirdly, we have to say, is there something naturally wrong with not having them? And again, we have to say no. All right, and why is it? Why did we answer no to all three of those? Because on this level, personal individuality trumps gender. I love that about Edith Stein. Okay, she tells us whatever the typicalities are, individuality trumps gender. I have a beautiful quote here that I include in my text, but I won't read it now, where she absolutely insists on this. Okay, so now this leads us to the very important question. We're still on point number 2. Should these tendencies be aimed at by us? Should we strive to be feminine in this or that tendency? Should we strive to realize the body-soul relationship that tends to be typical between man and a woman? And I'm going to be with Edith Stein on this. I'm going to give a resounding no. If we turn in on ourselves and on our gender, we violate that law of human existence, that we become ourselves only to the extent that we live for others. Okay, so our gender, whatever gender we are meant to have as an individual, will flower and flourish on the back of virtuous action. Okay, so, and I'll say this now because I don't have time at the end. In terms of beauty, the realization of individuality is more beautiful by an infinite degree to any abstract feminine or masculine attribute, okay? The realization of individuality is infinitely more beautiful than the possession of any abstract feminine or masculine trait. Okay, so then there's a third dimension of gender, and this I'll call the surface manifestation, or even in one sense, the superficial manifestations of gender. Okay, I'm thinking here of things like a feminine voice. Somebody has a feminine voice, or a masculine gait, or masculine gestures, or a masculine face, masculine stride, feminine stride, and so forth. Okay, this dimension of masculine and feminine is very interesting. It actually is, it's the dimension of masculine and femininity where I think Plato talks about something like this in the Republic, when he says all physical forms are a symbol for something spiritual. And it's the same thing here. Masculinity and femininity on this level are symbolic of a higher spiritual reality, which in fact is very beautiful. There's something beautiful about femininity. There's something beautiful about masculinity. Okay, but here's the thing. We want to ask what significance these things have. All right, first of all, femininity and masculinity on this way do not contain the substance of masculinity and femininity, okay? In no way do they in no way do they contain the essence of it. Secondly, these are gifts given to us by God. Just like intelligence is a gift given to one person, athleticism is given to another person, physical beauty is given to a third. Well, I think these masculine traits and feminine traits can be considered gifts from God, and he just gives them as he wills. And they can be received as gifts in gratitude, and they can be enjoyed in some sense, especially in others, not in ourselves, okay? But thirdly, we can say, are these to be aimed at? And here, again, I would say, definitely not. There's something truly inauthentic about a woman who tries to be feminine in this level, something truly inauthentic about a man who tries to be masculine. I don't know what, by maybe going out into nature and sort of proving things. I don't know what exactly, okay? Now, I in this talk, I'm talking about especially what gender doesn't mean, Okay, I do think there are a lot of things that gender does need to be retrieved, and there are things that people need for the flourishing of gender. But I don't have time, obviously, to talk about it here. Okay, so in any case, I think we should not try to generate these. And I don't think we really can, but I also think we shouldn't. All right, we negate something very important, which is this transcendence of the human person. So then I want to briefly end. This is part 2 of my little presentation here. I want to look at the implications of all of a few implications of all of this. Okay, so first of all, the first one I said, I think a very important one is that the beauty of individuality trumps the beauty of any abstract possession of gender traits or features. Secondly, I want to say the notion of striving to be a man or striving to be a woman is quite literally meaningless. All right, we can try to generate the third dimension, this very superficial dimension of masculinity and femininity in us. That we can try to aim for. I think it makes us inauthentic. But any deeper aiming at our own masculinity or femininity, I think there's just nothing we can do. Okay, it's something that exists already in us. I am a woman, and everything I do is thereby feminine. Okay, you are a man, thereby everything you do is masculine. Okay, and there might be conditions, all right, for a man and a woman to develop properly as man and woman. We obviously see with gender dysphoria there's something wrong, but I don't think it's actually to be corrected by aiming at gender. I think that behind it is actually a lack of affirmation as such. I think if every person were really loved into existence, so to speak, by their parents, they would emerge in full confidence as a self. And I think that the crisis of gender is actually a projection of a crisis of selfhood, really, a deeper crisis. Okay, so I know that I'm making a lot of big claims, and I know that they would need to be qualified in some way, but I'm pretty convinced that or I have a strong suspicion that the gender identity crisis is a more deeper crisis of selfhood. Okay, so then I would say that finally the proper development of gender occurs through the development of virtue. If we strive to attain virtue, our masculinity and our femininity will develop along healthy lines. And I just want to end briefly with touching on the affective life and the emotional life. And here, I don't think that we need a manual for women and growing in virtue and affectivity, and a manual for men in growing properly in affectivity. I think that if men and women find that they have similar pitfalls, by all means, get together and talk about those difficulties, right? People do enter into community to help one another to grow in different ways if they have similar weaknesses, okay? But I think that we all just have to look at the pitfalls, the weaknesses of our own affective life, and work on it. Okay, it's going to be the same for men and women. And finally, when it comes to the differences in affectivity between men and women, I think what's very interesting is it's in the fallen traits that we find the greater differences. In the saints, the emotional profile, I think, of men and women converges much more similar. Think of St. Teresa of Avila, think of St. Francis of Assisi, think of somebody like Don Bosco. Okay, I think that their emotional profiles sort of look a lot alike, and that's because of the transformative power of the good to which they have submitted themselves, and the transformative power of the divine to which they have united themselves. So I hope I didn't go over. I forgot to look at my time, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you all. It was a really excellent panel. I really liked the way in which you all built off of each other, and there was a really lovely flow to all of your presentations.
We did that on purpose.
Oh, yeah. It was good. There are several questions here about your comment about motherhood and fatherhood, Maria. Could you expound upon that point a little bit further? Is it fair to say that a woman who is a bad mother is a bad woman? That's a caveat question, but.
Oh my goodness. Oh, since other people have been advertising themselves a little bitly, I'll do so shamelessly. I wrote a booklet on women where I write about all this. It's such an important question. And first of all, the answer is no, okay? The answer is just no. And there are human life, and especially fallen human life, and especially, as Beth, you spoke so beautifully about woundedness, wounded human life, especially emotionally wounded human life, is so beset with difficulties. And that's why I think we shouldn't focus on our gender. We shouldn't, in some sense, even focus on I'm a bad mother. What we'll usually find behind that is that I'm not able to do my duty. Okay. And what we mean by bad is if we aren't able to do our duty well because of emotional weaknesses, we shouldn't feel guilt for that. We should simply seek help. And if we are not a good mother because of our vice, again, don't get stuck in guilt. Move into repentance right away, which takes a second, and start working on virtue. So there's so much more to that important question, but I want to keep it short because I'm sure others have things to say to that.
Catherine, can you repeat the question? My Zoom froze just when the question was being asked, so I didn't hear it.
I was just asking for further elaboration on the role of motherhood and fatherhood in gender, and if a woman who is a bad mother can also be considered a bad woman as well, and the relationship between those two.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I do think that there's a biological basis, right, for motherhood and fatherhood, obviously, right? And so there are certain tendencies that go along with that. So, you know, I do think there's a biological basis for females. I mean, we even see this in the rest of mammalia, for being attentive to our young, to being perhaps more empathic than the males in the species. And what we see oftentimes in male mammals is a greater level of aggression or protectiveness. So there is a biological basis there. I don't. I think I just want to agree with Maria on the latter part of the question, on what she said about motherhood and being, you know, being a good mother, being a good woman. I agree with Maria.
Christopher, do you want to add anything?
Well, I don't. I mean, I also agree with Maria. I'll only just add a little bit of what Stein says on this, in case anyone's wondering. Like she, you know, she also very much sees the nature of woman expressed in her biological capacities and also defined by her biological capacities for motherhood and for the man for fatherhood. And she sees various masculine and feminine types. Glad that you use that language so much, Maria, the types influenced by that. But she's very clear also that this is not limited to biological motherhood, right? And it's not limited to biological fatherhood, of course. And so the way that that your biological functions affects your nature and your personal character can be expressed in any number of ways, right? And is expressed in any number of ways. So just to add that point and to substantially agree. Yeah.
Could I just quickly add something? There's one way in which I think thinking about reflecting on roles. So I said, you know, I deny that you should think too much about your own gender, and I still hold to that. But there's one way in which reflecting on roles can be very helpful to a mother and a father in their task, and it's in the following. I think that if a woman can understand how important the gifts of motherhood are to the development of the child, this can inspire her to be dedicated to be for her child, or, for example, to avoid possibly taking work outside of the home when the child is very young and so forth. Understanding the significance of the motherly gifts can give her courage to be dedicated to her child, or to avoid leaving the child, for example, and so forth. And the same thing for fatherhood. And then each person should just be themselves when they're interacting with their children. But to give them courage and strength to do a very difficult job, I think if they understand the exalted nature and the importance of motherhood for not only giving the foundation for the life of the person in this life, but for all eternity, I think that can be very helpful reflection.
Which, if being a parent wasn't hard enough, Maria.
I'm going to read one more question, and then maybe we can go to small groups, because it seems there's a lot going on in the chat. So it seems that there's a disconnect between two levels, the superficial and the profound. If a child needs the different gifts that only a male father and a female mother can give, then it would seem to follow that distinct gender-determined capacities ought to be developed. Must there be an antagonism between individuality and gender determinism? Can we speak of a soft gender determinism, which meaningfully informs the character of every individual personality, shining forth from all of its acts?
So can you, I'm looking for that in the Q&A. Can you maybe summarize that?
So from my understanding of the question, it seems that there are certain gifts that only a man as a father or a woman as a mother can give to their child. So in that sense, that there are these sort of gender determined capacities that ought to be developed in a person. So does there need to be this sort of, I guess, over and against of the individuality versus this sort of gender determinism?
I think that we would all probably agree and say no. I mean, that those things will come about in being your person, right? In being who you are and developing. I mean, anytime that you're placing the emphasis, placing your goal on being a man, being a woman, you're really putting something almost, Stein doesn't quite say this, but like almost an idol in front of the person you're supposed to be, right? I mean, someone in the Q&A had mentioned how this relates to like God and eternal destiny and all of this, and in the fullness of the beatific vision, we become most fully ourselves. I mean, actually, her discussion of this, which is infinite and eternal being, is sort of reminiscent of Dante's, but you don't become like a manlier man, or you become a you or you. So the youest you, and so I mean that applies in our earthly life as well. And so with all these gifts, which aren't unimportant, they are important. And I mean, it's very important for men to teach their children manly things and women to teach their children womanly things. But this comes about by being you and teaching, because you're going to do those things in, you can't not do them in a masculine or feminine way in the very broadest sense, like Maria was talking about. And it's just not going to be, there are cultural norms and things like this, but these are, as Beth was saying, they're very malleable, and these are not of any real universal significance.
Yeah, and I think that, if a father is with his son the way he should be, the masculinity of the boy will develop. A son needs his father. So on the one hand, I agree with the fact of how essential and necessary these quote unquote traits are. On the other hand, it makes me stick all the more to what Christopher just said, because if we aim at gender characteristics, we put something between ourselves and the world. And then it just doesn't work. It's only in the response to the other that these things develop properly. And what the son or the daughter, whatever, needs is that masculinity in the deeper sense, which is present to them in what the mother's supposed to do, what every parent's supposed to do, which was be for the child. And if the parent is for the child, everything will go along correctly.
Right. And just to add to that, Maria, I think the aim is not developing feminine and masculine traits per se, but I think the aim for all of us is sanctity, or maybe put more in Aristotelian terms, virtue, right? So the virtuous life or sanctity, and as you said, if I am a woman, it's always as feminine. If I'm a man, it's always as masculine. And so rather than aim at that per se, why not aim at sanctity?
Yeah.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you all so much for a very interesting panel, and for navigating such a tricky topic. There's always an overflow of more questions on the topic of gender. So maybe we can come back to some of these in our happy hour later this afternoon, or including some of them in the final panel tomorrow. So, but thank you all so much.
Thank you.
And we'll be back this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Christopher. Beth, thank you.
Bye, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you both. Mhm.